The sea was restless that afternoon, its waves carrying the weight of something ancient, something that always seemed to know more than the people standing at its edge. The salt wind stung her eyes, but it wasn't the wind that made them water. She was already crying long before the first wave touched her dress. Her white cotton slip clung to her, soaked through as she knelt in the shallows, clutching her stomach with one hand. Her belly was swollen, heavy with life, but the weight in her chest was heavier. In her other hand, she gripped the thin silver chain he had ordered her to find, the one that now dangled like a cruel joke between her trembling fingers. A round locket swung from it, dripping with sea water, the waves tugging at it as if the ocean itself wanted to steal it away again. She pressed her lips together, trying to breathe, but the sobs kept breaking through. Every gasp came out raw, jagged, torn from a heart that no longer felt like haze. On the sand, not far from her, he stood, the man she had once trusted with everything, the man whose promises she had woven her whole life around. He wasn't looking at her. His eyes, his arms, his laughter, all of it belonged to the woman in the red dress clinging to his side. The mistress's laugh carried across the beach, high and sharp, like glass breaking. She leaned into him, her head thrown back in delight, one hand pointing at the broken figure in the waves. And he laughed with her. He didn't even flinch at the sight of his wife on her knees, gasping and weeping, clutching at the life inside her as if protecting the child from him too. The humiliation burned hotter than the sun overhead. She wanted to scream, to stand and demand he see her, but her voice felt drowned already, swallowed by the sea, by his betrayal. "Get up!" He had barked at her before, his tone cold and impatient, as if speaking to a servant rather than the woman who had once shared his bed, his secrets, his dreams. "If you love me, you'll bring it back." She dropped it. It means everything to her. She had stared at him then, her mind refusing to make sense of the words. The bracelet, the necklace, whatever trinket it was. How could a scrap of metal mean more than her, more than their child? But his eyes had hardened in that way she had come to know too well. And in that look, she saw no husband, no partner, no father-to-be. Only a stranger, cold and ruthless. So she had walked into the water. Now, kneeling in the surf, she held the chain out to him, as if this proof of obedience could mend what was already shattered. Her fingers shook. Her throat ached with unshed words. "Hey!" she tried to say, though it came out as a whisper swallowed by the waves. He didn't move toward her. He didn't take it. The mistress tugged at his arm, her lips brushing his ear, and he bent to listen. A smile spread across his face, the kind of smile he used to save only for her. The chain slipped from her fingers, falling into the water again. She caught it quickly, clutching it to her chest, her heart pounding as if she had lost something more than metal in that instant. Her knees scraped against the sand beneath the water, the tide pulling at her dress. She felt the baby shift inside her, a reminder of what was real, what was still hers. She pressed a hand over her belly, whispering through her tears, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The mistress's laughter rang out again, crueler this time, and then she said it, loud enough for the waves to carry to her ears. "She looks pathetic, like a drowned rat." The words sliced through her. She closed her eyes, wishing the ocean would rise higher and take her whole, wash away the ache that had become her life. For a moment, she let herself sink back, the water climbing to her shoulders. The cold shocked her, numbing the sting of tears, the sting of betrayal. Would it be easier to let go, to stop fighting? The thought terrified her, yet it whispered like a dark lullaby, tempting her with its simplicity. But then, inside her, the baby kicked. Firm, alive, insistent. Her eyes flew open. She gasped, choking on salt water as she dragged herself upright again. No, not yet. Not like this. If she let herself disappear, she would take an innocent life with her. And that she couldn't do. She rose to her feet, shaky but determined, gripping the necklace as though it were a rope keeping her tethered to the world. Her dress clung to her like a second skin, transparent in the sun, leaving her dignity stripped bare. Still, she faced him. For the first time, he looked at her, really looked, and in his eyes she saw nothing. No shame, no sorrow, just irritation, as though she had ruined their afternoon with her tears. Something inside her broke completely then, not with a scream, not with anger, but with a silence so deep it hollowed her out. She turned away. She let the sea wash over her ankles, her calves, her knees. She let the necklace fall once more, watching the waves claim it. She didn't dive after it this time. She simply walked farther into the water, slow and deliberate, until it seemed the ocean might take her for good. Behind her, the mistress's laughter faltered. The husband called her name once, sharp and impatient, but not out of love, more out of disbelief that she would dare to walk away. The water rose to her waist. She didn't stop, and then, just as the tide threatened to pull her under, she looked back at them for the last time. The mistress clutching his arm, his face twisted with a flicker of something, fear, maybe, or regret. She held that image in her mind like a wound, then turned her back on it forever. The sea swallowed her steps, and soon the shore and the laughter were nothing but echoes behind her. The sea did not claim her that day. She drifted, carried by currents that seemed to pity her more than the man she had left behind. The waves shoved her toward a jagged strip of rocks at the far end of the beach, where she clawed her way out, coughing salt water from her lungs, every breath scraping her throat raw. For long while she just lay there, chest heaving, dress clinging to her skin, her body trembling with exhaustion and grief. Above her, the sky was a pale blue, indifferent to her pain. The world kept turning as though nothing had broken. Yet she felt as though she had died already, and only the child stirring inside her reminded her she hadn't. When she finally staggered to her feet, her knees were raw, her palms cut from the rocks. She looked down the beach. They were gone. No figures, no laughter, no cruel pointing finger. Only the wide empty shore and the whisper of the sea. She felt strangely lighter, though the ache in her chest was unbearable. She had no necklace now, no husband, no home. Nothing tied her to the life she had just walked away from. That, she realized, was both terrifying and freeing. She turned her back on the place she had once called hers and began to walk. The town she reached was small, tucked into a bend of the coast where the sea met hills scattered with houses. Its streets smelled of salt and fish, its walls peeling with sun-bleached paint. No one knew her here. That was what she needed. At first, she moved like a ghost, silent and unnoticed, drifting between corners and shadows. Hunger drove her to ask for work, but shame made her voice small. She learned quickly that pity had its limits. People were kind, but kindness was never endless, and she cared no proof of who she had been. So she took what she could, cleaning nets, sweeping floors in the tea house, carrying baskets of fish from the boats at dawn, her belly heavy, her back aching, every step a reminder how close she was to breaking. The owner of the tea house, an old woman with sharp eyes and a surprisingly soft heart, noticed her struggles. She never asked too many questions, never pried about the bruises that hadn't healed or the sorrow that clung to her like a second skin. She simply said, "Work here as long as you need. Rest when the child comes. We'll manage." Those words were the first kindness she had received in months. She nearly cried right there, but instead she bowed her head and whispered her gratitude. Nights were the hardest. When the streets emptied and the sea grew louder in the distance, her mind filled with echoes of the past. She remembered how he had once looked at her, back when love was still new, when laughter had belonged to them both. She remembered how she had carried his promises like treasures, never doubting they would last. Now those memories were like ashes on her tongue, bitter and impossible to swallow. She often sat by the window of her small rented room, watching the moonlight spill across the sea, and whispered to her unborn child, You will never know that cruelty, she promised. You will never be made to kneel for love. I will give you something better. And yet, doubt gnawed at her. Could she raise this child alone? Could she protect them from a world where people betrayed, where love turned to poison? Still, each time the baby kicked, she felt an answer. Life wanted to go on. That was enough. Months passed. Her body grew heavier, her steps slower, until the day came when labor tore through her like a storm. She cried out in the small room, clutching the sheets, sweat soaking her hair. The old woman from the tea house came, bringing cloths and water, her hand steady, her voice firm. The hours were endless, filled with pain so sharp she thought it might break her. But at the end of it, as dawn broke over the sea, she heard the cry of her child. A daughter, tiny, fragile, perfect. She held her close, tears streaming freely, her heart splitting open in a way that was nothing like the shattering on the beach. This was different. This was a breaking that made her whole. She named her Mai, after the word for beauty that her own mother used to whisper. Life became a rhythm after that. Hard, but steady. Days of working in the tea house with Mai strapped to her back. Nights of feeding, rocking, whispering lullabies she barely remembered from her own childhood. There were moments of peace, Mai's small hand gripping her finger, the first time she smiled, the soft weight of her sleeping against her chest. Those moments stitched her heart back together, one tiny thread at a time. Still, the shadows of the past lingered. Sometimes, when she caught her reflection, she saw the woman kneeling in the safe, crying as laughter echoed behind her. The memory felt carved into her skin, a wound that healed but never vanished. And yet, she began to notice something else too. Strength, the kind she had never known she possessed. She could carry baskets heavier than she thought possible. She could work through exhaustion and still smile at her daughter. She could survive betrayal and still wake up each morning determined to keep going. One night, while rocking Mai to sleep, she whispered, "He thought I would drown. But look at us, little one. We're still here." Rumors traveled even to this quiet town. One afternoon, while serving tea, she overheard fishermen talking at a corner table. Strange news, one of them said. That businessman down the coast, the one who built those big houses by the water. They say his wife drowned, but now someone's claiming they saw her alive. Inland, maybe. No one knows for sure. Her hands froze around the teapot. Her breath caught. She kept her face blank, her movement steady. But inside, her pulse thundered. He thought she was dead. He had told the world she was gone. And yet, people were whispering. Her existence was not as invisible as she had believed. That night, she lay awake with Mai curled against her, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, she wondered what it would mean if he learned the truth. Would he come for her? Would he take the child? Fear gripped her. But beneath the fear, there was something sharper, something she had never let herself feel before. Defiance. She had escaped once. She had built something new from the ashes. And if he ever came near her again, he would see that she was no longer the woman who had knelt in the waves. She had already begun her transformation. The nights in the coastal town grew cooler as autumn settled in. Leaves rustled through narrow streets, and the smell of roasted chestnuts drifted from street vendors. She would walk those streets with Mai bundled close, a shawl wrapped around both of them. People had grown used to her presence, no longer the stranger who appeared one summer morning, but the young mother who worked hard, who never asked for more than she gave. For her, life had become a rhythm of small victories. Mai's first laugh, her first steps across the wooden floor of the tea house, her first word, "Mama," spoken softly in the middle of the night. Each milestone filled her with a warmth she had thought she'd never feel again. And yet, she could not stop herself from imagining the other life, the one she had left behind. In that life, he was unraveling. The grand house by the sea had grown colder, though its walls were gilded with wealth. The mistress in the red dress, so once vibrant, so once intoxicating, now seemed like a stranger even to him. Her laughter, once thrilling, grated on him like a sharp edge. Her demands were constant, her eyes sharp with suspicion whenever he fell into silence. At first, he told himself it was grief, that losing his wife in the sea had unsettled him. But grief was not supposed to feel like this, not supposed to claw the edges of his mind at night, whispering her name when he closed his eyes. Sometimes he swore he heard her voice in the crash of the waves outside. Sometimes he woke in the dark, drenched in sweat, convinced she was standing at the foot of the bed. "Are you awake?" the mistress would murmur, curling against him. "It's nothing, just a dream." But he knew better. It was not a dream. It was her absence, alive and heavy, haunting him more than her presence ever had. He threw himself into work, into the empire he had built. But the numbers blurred, the meetings dragged, the voices of his associates carried tones of doubt he could not stand. Rumors had begun to circle, about his cruelty, about his wife, about whispers that she hadn't died at all. He tried to silence them with money, but rumors are like smoke. They see through cracks no matter how tightly you seal the door. The mistress grew restless too. She wanted more gifts, more attention, more proof that she was the center of his world. But the more she demanded, the more he realized she could never fill the hollow space his wife had left behind. "You think of her," the mistress spat one night, her voice sharp as glass. "Don't deny it. You see her when you look at me." He didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. Meanwhile, in the quiet coastal town, she continued to rebuild. There was peace in the small things, kneading dough for the tea-house's morning buns, mending nets for fishermen, teaching Ma to count seashells by the shore. She laughed again, softly at first, then with more freedom, like rediscovering a language she had once forgotten. Still, she could not fully escape the shadows. One evening, as she closed the tea-house, she noticed a man lingering by the corner. His coat was fine, his shoes too polished for fishermen. When she turned toward him, he disappeared into the alley. Her heart pounded as she carried Ma upstairs. She tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but the unease stayed with her for days. If he was looking for her, it meant he still cared enough to search. Or perhaps he simply wanted to erase a reminder of what he had done. Either way, she knew their paths were not finished with each other yet. For him, the unraveling deepened. At a dinner party, surrounded by laughter and crystal glasses, he caught sight of a woman across the room. Her white dress clung to her like wet cloth, her hair dripping with seawater, her eyes filled with betrayal. He staggered to his feet, knocking over his glass. But when he rushed toward her, she was gone. Guests murmured, uneasy, watching him with the first flickers of pity and suspicion. Later, alone, he stared into a mirror. His reflection seemed warped. He thought he saw her behind him, clutching her belly, her lips whispering words he couldn't hear. He smashed the glass with his fist. Blood dripped onto the floor. Still, he could not silence her presence. In the town, she was growing stronger. Her daughter had given her purpose, but she herself was changing too. She no longer bowed her head out of habit. She spoke clearly, worked steadily, and began to dream of things beyond survival. One evening, she wrote a letter, her first in years. Not to him, not to anyone from the past, but to herself. She folded it carefully and tucked it into a wooden box, a promise that she was more than what had been done to her. "I am not the woman who knelt in the waves," she wrote. "I am the woman who rose again." The reckoning was approaching. He could not escape her ghost. Every laugh of the mistress rang false. Every deal he struck fell hollow. His fortune, his power, his mistress, none of it silenced the truth. He had thrown his wife into the sea, and she had risen from it. And perhaps, he thought in his darker moments, she had risen not just to live, but to return. His paranoia grew close. He sent men to search inland, following whispers of a woman with long dark hair and a child. Each time they came back with nothing, he grew more restless, more unhinged. The mistress began to fear him. One night, when he raged at the sea outside their house, screaming her name, the mistress quietly packed her things. By morning, she was gone, leaving only a note scrawled with bitterness. You will never love anyone but her, will you? Even in death, she owns you. He tore the note to pieces, but he could not deny its truth. And far away, she watched my sleep, her heart steady, her resolve stronger than ever. She knew the past had not ended on that beach. It was only waiting. The day would come when their lives would collide again. And this time, she would not be the one left kneeling in the waves. The night she decided to return was not dramatic. No storm, no thunder, just a quiet evening, her daughter asleep, the sea humming softly beyond the hills. She sat at the wooden table in her small room, a candle flickering low, and realized she could not live the rest of her life in shadows. Hiding had been survival, but survival was not the same as living. Mai deserved a future without fear, and she herself deserved an ending. Not the ending he had written for her, but one she would claim for herself. She wrapped Mai in a shawl, packed a few belongings she owned, and at dawn, set out on the road back toward the coast she had once fled. The house looked the same from a distance, tall, proud, walls painted white against the blue of the sea. But up close, its windows were dull, curtains drawn, its garden untended. A house once filled with parties and light now stood like a mausoleum. She felt no nostalgia as she climbed the path, only a steady resolve. When the door opened, he stood before her, thinner than she remembered, eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. For a moment, they both froze, him staring as if at a ghost, her standing tall with Mai at her side. His voice cracked, hoarse. You're alive. Yes, she said simply. His gaze dropped to Mai, then back to her face. His lips trembled. My child. Our child, she corrected, her tone sharp but even, though you forfeited the right to claim her the day you left me in the sea. He staggered back, pressing a hand to the doorframe as if her words had struck him physically. I thought. No, she cut him off. You didn't think at all. The confrontation unfolded in the grand hall, a place where once they had laughed, once they had danced. Now it was a tomb for every broken promise. He tried at first to defend himself. Words spilled from him, excuses, regrets, fragments of apology. He spoke of weakness, of how he had been blinded by desire, manipulated by the mistress, consumed by pride. I regret it every day, he confessed, voice breaking. You haunt me. I see you everywhere. I thought I lost you forever. She listened, but her heart did not waver. Once, his voice could move her. Once, his sorrow would have softened her. But now, she saw clearly, his regret was real. But regret was not love. Regret was not redemption. You regret losing control, she said quietly. Not losing me. He fell silent. The mistress returned that evening, perhaps drawn by curiosity, perhaps by desperation. When she saw the wife standing there, holding the child, her face twisted with rage. So it's true, she spat. The drowned rat survived. The wife did not flinch. Yes, and unlike you, I don't need to cling to another's power to live. The mistress's eyes burned, but she saw something in the wife that made her step back, something unbreakable, something she could not mock into silence. The husband looked between them, torn, desperate. He reached out as if to touch the wife's arm, but she moved back. No, she said, you don't get to touch me. Not now. Not ever again. He collapsed into a chair, his hands covering his face. The mistress stormed out, her footsteps echoing like the last note of a song that had ended long ago. The wife walked through the house one last time. Room by room, She let the memories rise, their wedding night, their whispered dreams, their shared laughter before betrayal poisoned it all. Each memory a ghost, but one she was finally ready to release. When she returned to the hall, he was still sitting there, broken. He looked up at her, eyes hollow. "Can you forgive me?" Her answer was soft but firm. "Forgiveness is not yours to take. It is mine to give, and I will not waste it on a man who threw me away." He flinched. "You will live with what you did," she continued. "Every wave you hear, every reflection you see, it will remind you of me, of what you lost. That is your punishment." Then she toned, lifted me into her arms, and walked to the door. Outside, the sea was calm. The same sea that had nearly claimed her now seemed to welcome her return. She stood for a moment, breathing deeply, her daughter's small head resting on her shoulder. She realized then that she no longer hated him. Hatred tied her to him just as much as love once had. What she felt now was something deeper, something final. Freedom. She stepped off the path, away from the house, away from the ruin of the man inside, and into the life she had built with her own hands. He never followed. From the windows of the empty house, he watched the figure grow smaller, swallowed by distance. He felt his chest hollow out, his hands shaking as though trying to grasp what had already slipped through his fingers. For the rest of his days, he would hear her voice in the crash of the waves. He would see her eyes in the moonlight on the water. He would live surrounded by everything money could buy, yet haunted by the one thing it never could. The woman who had risen from the sea, stronger than he could ever be. She reached the hilltop as the sun began to rise, its light spilling across the horizon. She turned once, not toward the house but toward the sea, and whispered to her daughter, "This is where it began, but it's not where it ends." I stirred in her arms, her tiny hand brushing her cheek, and she smiled. Together, they walked into the dawn, the sea behind them, the future wide and unbroken ahead.